All right, so these are some examples on solving linear equations that involve fractions. And so I want you to notice that this linear equation, we have 6/5 x minus 2/3 equals 4. And when you have fractions, see these denominators? So if you look at this fraction here, my denominator is 5. When you look at this fraction, my denominator is 3. And you can consider this as a fraction because 4, remember I can write as 4 divided by 1. So those are all fractions. Now, the best way to do this is to go ahead and clear those fractions. And so we're going to clear those fractions by multiplying both sides by the least common denominators. So that's the best way of solving linear equations with fractions. Multiply both sides by the least common denominator. Now, technically, you have three fractions here. You have 6x divided by 5, subtract, and then 2/3. Although we do, in terms of terms, we can consider this term here as a negative 2/3. And then we have this fraction 4 divided by 1. So in finding the least common denominator, we're looking at the numbers 5, 3, and 1. So the smallest number that 5, 3, and 1 go into evenly is 15. So that's your least common denominator. All right, once you find the least common denominator, and you always want to use the least. So 5, 3, and 1 will go into 30, but that's not a least. So always use the least. It does make things a lot easier for you. All right, so once you find the least common denominator, we want to multiply both sides by that least common denominator, by that number. In this case, is 15. Notice that the left-hand side has two fractions. The right-hand side has one term. Two terms, one term. So whenever you have more than one term, you need to put that in parentheses. So it looks something like this. 6/5 x minus 2/3 equals 4. Notice that I did not put 4 in parentheses because that's just one term. All right, so remember the whole purpose of multiplying both sides by the least common denominator is to clear those fractions. So now at this point, you're going to say you're going to multiply both sides by 15, just like this. So what you do to the left-hand side, you have to do to the right. All right, now notice I did introduce parentheses, so now I've got to clear those parentheses using the distributive property. So I have 15 times 6/5 x, subtract 15 times 2/3, just like this, equal, and then 15 times 4. All right, at this point, we're going to reduce. We want to go ahead and get those denominators to be factors of 1. And so by reducing, I can now do that. 5 into 5 is 1. 5 into 15 is 3. 3 into 3 is 1. 3 into 15 is 5. Okay? All right, so now 3 times 6 is 18. So I'm multiplying from left to right. 3 times, that's multiplication here. 3 times 6 is 18, and 18 times x is 18x. Subtract, 5 times 2 is 10, equal, and then 15 times 4, if you need to use your calculator, always use your calculator. You have access to it. 15 times 4, you know, is going to be 60. All right, so we get 60 here. All right, now when solving a linear equation, notice I no longer have any fractions. That makes things a lot easier for me. So this is the only term that has a variable in it. So I need to bring this constant to the right-hand side. Right now I'm subtracting 10. The opposite is to add 10. And so when combining like terms now, these are opposites. A negative 10 and a positive 10 added to be 0. That's what you wanted. So you get 18x equal, and then 60 plus 10 is 70. All right, at this point, you need to get x by itself. You need to solve for x. So the coefficient is 18, meaning that I'm multiplying x by 18. The opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 18. All right, now reducing next, I get 18 divided by 18 is 1. 1 times x is x. Do not leave the answer like this. You always want to make sure you can you have your answer in reducible form. So I want you to notice that 70 and 18 are both even, right? Meaning that they're both divisible by 2. So let's go and divide both of those by 2. 70 divided by 2 is 35. And then 18 divided by 2 is 9. And 35 and 9, the only number that those two have in common is the factor 1. And so you can leave your answers as an improper fraction, or you can write as a mixed number. So 9 into 35. So 9 to 35 will be what, 3? Not 4, because that's be 36. So 3 times 9 is 27. Subtract 35 minus 27 is going to be 8. So I get 3 and 8 ninths. So 3 and 8 ninths. All right. Okay, so that was number 1. So solve is notice it was not a difficult linear equation with fractions. Pretty simple process. Let's go ahead and look at another example. All right, so number 2, we have this linear equation. We have 4 times x minus 5 divided by 3 equals 2x minus 1. And I want you to notice that the left-hand side, we can consider that one fraction, right? Because the numerator is 4 times x minus 5, and the denominator is 3. So my denominator is 3. In the right-hand side, there are a couple ways you can think about this. You can think about this as two terms, 2x and a negative 1, with a denominator of 1 each. So 2x divided by 1 minus 1 divided by 1. Or if you want to, you can think of it like this as well. Just want to show you. You can think of this as 2x minus 1 divided by 1, right? So you have a fraction equal to a fraction. Consider it like that. Now, remember the whole idea when you have fractions is to go ahead and clear those fractions. So we're going to multiply both sides by the least common denominator. Now, if I look at both of those sides here, my denominators are 3 and 1. So I know right away, very easily, that the least common denominator is going to be 3. Before I do that, though, what I want you to recognize is that I can make this possibly a little easier for me if I go ahead and get rid of these parentheses here right away. So I'm going to use the distributive property. And so when I do that, I get the numerator is 4 times x is 4x. That's going to be the numerator. Subtract, and then 4 times 5 is 20. Divided by 3. Equal, and then there are no parentheses here, so I'm just going to rewrite this as 2x minus 1 divided by 1. All right, so that's what I have. So sometimes for some students it does make simplifying this numerator using distributive property a little bit easier for you. Okay, so now I'm going to multiply both sides by the least common denominator. I have one fraction equal one fraction. So let me go ahead and rewrite this over. So here's my equation thus far. So all of these equations here are equivalent. Notice this equation is equivalent to this equation. Is equivalent to this equation, is equivalent to this equation. So they're all equal to each other. So meaning that whatever the solution is, the solution here will be the same as the solution here, the solution here, the solution here. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by the least common denominator. That was this right here, clearing the fractions. So you can say times 3 and then times 3. Okay? All right, now I want you to notice that the next step is to reduce. You want to factor 1 down here. That's the whole purpose of multiplying both sides by the least common denominator, to get these denominators to be 1s. So 3 into 3 is 1, 3 into 3 is 1. Okay? Now I want you to notice something. See, that's a 1 right here, right? So 1 times 4x minus 20 is 4x minus 20, right? So that's just 4x minus 20 on the left-hand side. Equal, notice I'm aligning my equal sign. Sometimes it helps to do that. Align your symbols, your equal signs. Now over here, be careful, because 3 is being multiplied by each of those terms here. So you need to put this numerator in parentheses. So put it in parentheses. And what I end up having is this. I end up having 3 times 2x minus 1. So this is this. So you may say, well, why didn't you put that in parentheses? You could have, but I didn't because that's a 1 here. 1 times this expression is the expression. If you wanted to, you could have said 1 times 4x minus 20 parentheses, but it's still, right? 4x minus 20? All right, now let's go ahead and use the distributive property here. So I get 4x minus 20 equal 3 times 2x is 6x, and then 3 times the negative 1 is a negative 3. So notice I have a linear equation without any fractions. So if I can solve this linear equation, then the solution of this linear equation is going to be the solution to each of these right here, in particular, my original equation. All right, so when solving a linear equation, remember you want to bring all the variables one side, constants to the other. And it does not matter whether you bring the variables to the left or the variables to the right. It does not matter. The habit for students is to bring the variables to the left-hand side. So let's go ahead and do that. Although some students would recognize, hey, if I bring the variables to the right-hand side, my coefficient will be positive. That is true. It would be positive, but it doesn't matter. Let's just go ahead and subtract 6x from both sides. Notice I'm subtracting 6x because right now the coefficient of x here is a positive 6. So the opposite of positive 6 is negative 6. So meaning that I'm really subtracting 6x from both sides. Notice I'm aligning my like terms. When I combine my like terms, 4x and a negative 6x is a negative 2x. Subtract 20 equal, notice my equal signs are aligned. Positive 6x and a negative 6x, those are opposites. So when I add opposites, I get 0. 0 and a negative 3 is a negative 3, or 0 subtract 3 is a negative 3. All right, so now I have a linear equation. This is the only term with a variable. So I need to bring this constant to the right-hand side. I'm subtracting 20. The opposite of subtracting 20 is to add 20 to both sides. Notice I'm aligning my like terms. When I combine my like terms, these are opposites, that's 0. A negative 2x and 0 is a negative 2x equal a negative 3 and a positive 20 is a positive 17. All right, at this point, I got to get x by itself. I have one more step and I'm done. So the coefficient of x is a negative 2. So I'm saying negative 2 times x. And the opposite of multiplication is division. So to get x by itself, I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by the coefficient, which is a negative 2. So now I'm going to reduce. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is a positive 1. 1 times x is x equal. All right, now 17 divided by negative 2. I want you to notice that 17 and negative 2, the only common factor is 1. So I can write this as negative 17 halves. So that's my answer. Or if I want to, since that's a improper fraction, I can change it to a mixed number. So 2 and a 17 will be what? 8. 8 times 2 is 16 with the remainder of 1. So I get 8 and 1/2. In this case, though, it's negative 8 and 1/2. All right, and so that's the solution to the original equation. So all of those equations are equivalent. So this solution is a solution to this equation, and so on. All right, so that's number 2. All right, let's look at number 3. Let's do one more, number 3. All right, so when I solve this linear equation, notice that both of those fractions, I have one fraction equal to another fraction, and the denominators are 3 and 5. And so it's easy to see that the least common denominator would be 15. So remember, you want to clear those fractions. So at some point, we're going to multiply both sides by 15 to get these denominators to be 1s. Before I do that, just like in the previous problem, let's go ahead and clear those parentheses up here. So we're going to use the distributive property. So negative 5 times 4x, using distributive property, negative 5 times 4x, in my numerator will be a negative 20x, and a negative 5 times a positive 1 is a negative 5, divided by 3. Equal, over here, using distributive property, I get 2 times x is 2x, subtract, and then 2 times 4 is 8, all divided by 5. Okay? All right, so that's the first thing I would have done. It makes things a little bit easier. All right, now the next step is to multiply both sides by the least common denominator. Now I only have one fraction here and one fraction here, so I'm not going to put anything in parentheses at this point. So I'm just going to say this. Let me go ahead and rewrite this over. So you had negative 20x minus 5 divided by 3 equal 2x minus 8 divided by 5. All right, so at this point, I'm going to multiply both sides by 15. So times 15 times 15. Now, let's reduce. So the whole point, remember the whole point of multiplying both sides by the LCD is to clear those fractions. So you meaning you got ones in those denominators, and you do now. 3 into 3 is 1. 3 into 15 is 5. 5 into 5 is 1. 5 into 15 is 3. Now, at this point, I want you to recognize. So the next step is to simplify what we have here or perform operations. I want you to know that this says 5 times this whole thing right here, negative 20x minus 5. So you got to put that in parentheses. It equals 3 times, that's multiplication, all of this. So you got to put that in parentheses. All right, so it helps to do that at that point. So now you're going to say 5 times negative 20x minus 5 equal 3 times 2x minus 8. So this right here is equivalent to this. Okay, now let's go ahead and get rid of the parentheses using the distributive property. And so I get negative 5 times a negative 20x is a negative 100x. 5 times a negative 5 is a negative 25 equal 3 times 2x is 6x, and then subtract, and then 3 times 8 is 24. All right, so let's go ahead and bring all the variables to one side, constants to the other. So I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides, and it's a positive 6x, just like this. Notice I'm aligning my like terms. Now when I combine my like terms, a negative 100x and a negative 6x is a negative 106x. Minus 25 equal, these are opposites, so I get 0. 0 and a negative 24 is a negative 24. All right, right now I'm subtracting 25, so I got to do the opposite, which is to add 25 to both sides. And so when I combine like terms now, these are opposites, I get 0. So I get a negative 106x equal a negative 24 and a positive 25 is a positive 1. All right, so I'm going to rewrite this over. All right, so remember, you want to solve for x, right? So right now I'm multiplying x by negative 106. The opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by that coefficient. So negative 106 divided by negative 106 is 1. 1 times x is x, equal. And then remember, a positive divided by negative is a negative. And then all you have is 1 divided by 106. You cannot reduce that. And by the way, this is not a improper fraction. That's a proper fraction, so you cannot write this as a mixed number. So there's your answer. Okay, so that were 3 problems where we had fractions, and so now you should have a little better idea on how to solve linear equations that have fractions by clearing fractions by multiplying both sides by the least common denominator. All right, so that's the end of those examples.